It almost always starts in the pitch black.
Oh, absolutely.
You're completely dead to the world, and then suddenly there is that shrill, unforgiving electronic blare of the alarm clock just shattering the
It's
silence.
the worst sound in the world.
It really is. You jerk awake, and before your eyes even have a chance to adjust to the dark of the room, before you even really know what day it is, there's this instant, heavy jolt of dread right in the absolute center of your chest.
Yet you haven't even formed a single conscious thought yet.
Exactly, not one coherent thought. But your heart is already racing, and your breathing is shallow. You finally drag yourself out from under the warm covers, and your bare feet hit that freezing cold bathroom floor tile.
Which is just a shock to the system all on its own.
Right. And then you stumble into the kitchen entirely on autopilot. You hear the harsh, loud grind of the coffee beans. You smell that familiar Dirk roast. And while you're just standing there, shivering slightly in the dark, staring blankly at the coffee maker as it drips, your mind is already sprinting.
It's running through, what, a dozen catastrophic what-ifs about the workday.
Exactly. Like, what if that client hates the proposal? Or what if my boss brings up that mistake from Tuesday? What if I don't have enough time to finish the report? It's just endless.
It is a profoundly universal human experience.
Yeah.
That highly specific feeling of waking up and already feeling like you are hopelessly behind.
Yes, exactly.
You're already on the defensive before the sun has even come up. And we all walk around liking to think of ourselves as the rational, deliberate captains of our own ships.
We really do. We like to think we're in control.
We think we navigate our days with clear intention and logic. But the biological reality is that in those early morning hours, and frankly, throughout a lot of the day, we are completely at the mercy of invisible currents.
Just totally drifting.
Yeah, our nervous systems are reacting to stimuli that our conscious minds haven't even registered yet.
And the thing is, it is just so incredibly frustrating. Like, why does it feel like this heavy, invisible weight is steering the ship?
Right.
Why do we find ourselves suddenly and without warning snapping at the people we love most in the world over something completely trivial?
Over, like, a misplaced coffee mug.
Yes. You absolutely lose your mind over a mug or, I don't know, a pair of shoes left in the hallway. Or why, when we are so bone tired, when our eyes are literally burning and we desperately just want to go to sleep, do we lie in bed doom scrolling the news on our phones until 2 in the morning?
It's a maddening cycle.
It really is. So we are looking at a stack of incredibly fascinating research notes and psychological frameworks today. And our goal isn't just to read abstract theory. The mission of this exploration is to decode this exact daily struggle.
Which is so needed.
We want to figure out the actual mechanics of how our brains wire themselves for these frustrating habits and this endless low-grade anxiety. And far more importantly, we want to look at how you can consciously rewrite that programming to actually reclaim some peace in your daily life.
And what's really beautiful about the literature we are looking at today is that the very first step to reclaiming that peace is actually just offering yourself a massive amount of grace.
Oh, I love that. Grace is so important.
It is. A lot of the research makes this crucial foundational point right out of the gate. These frustrating, seemingly irrational reactions you are having, they are not character flaws.
That is such a relief to hear.
Right. You are not broken. You aren't lacking discipline or, fundamentally flawed as a person. What you are experiencing on a minute-by-minute basis are ancient, highly evolved survival mechanisms.
Survival mechanisms.
Yeah. They're working perfectly. They're doing exactly what evolution designed them to do over millions of years. The only problem is they are operating in entirely the wrong era.
Wow. That in itself is just a massive relief because it really does feel like a deep personal failing when you're sitting in your car gripping the steering wheel in a panic,
Oh, absolutely. It feels like you're losing your mind.
But let's stay with our narrative of the morning to really illustrate how this works. So, you're in the bedroom. You've hit the snooze button 3 times, which, by the way, you promised yourself you wouldn't do last night.
Of course. We all make that promise.
Every night. So you finally scramble out the door, you're skipping breakfast, you're feeling completely rushed, your pulse is pounding in your ears. You get into your car, and you drive the entire 30-minute commute to the office.
Just completely stressed out.
Right. You navigate turns, you stop at red lights, you merge onto the highway, you pull into the parking lot, you turn off the ignition, and you suddenly realize you do not remember a single second of the drive.
It's a terrifying feeling.
It really is. Your mind was a million miles away.
Right.
You were operating the heavy machinery of a vehicle on pure, unadulterated muscle memory.
It's always a slightly terrifying realization when you snap out of that trance and realize you've been driving a car with zero conscious awareness.
Seriously, like
Yeah.
who was driving?
Exactly. But it perfectly highlights a really staggering statistic from the behavioral studies in our notes. Up to 43% of our daily actions are performed entirely out of habit.
Wait, 43%?
Yes, that is nearly half of your day.
Mm.
Half of your waking life is spent on pure autopilot, with your conscious brain basically checked out.
Almost half. That is wild. When I read that number in the text, I honestly didn't believe it at first. But then I started tracking my own morning.
And what did you find?
Oh, it's all completely scripted. The way I tie my shoes, the exact route I walk the dog, the specific sequence I use to open my email. It's like I'm a robot.
It is entirely scripted. And to understand why we do this, why we essentially turn ourselves into robots for half the day,
Hmm.
we have to look at the underlying mechanics.
It's the science behind it.
Right. What researchers call the habit loop. The literature generally breaks this down into three distinct chronological phases.
Okay, what are they?
The cue, the routine, and the reward. If we look back at your morning scenario, the cue is that shrill, unmistakable blare of the alarm clock, piercing the quiet room.
Ugh, the cue from hell.
Exactly. Then the routine is the physical, almost thoughtless action of reaching your arm out and hitting the snooze button.
Without even opening your eyes.
Right. And the reward is that immediate, intoxicatingly comforting sensation of pulling the warm, heavy blankets back up to your chin, just sinking into the mattress for 5 more minutes of sleep.
So what is actually happening inside our heads when that loop plays out? Why are we biologically wired to fall into these repetitive loops so easily? I mean, even when we know hitting snooze is going to ruin our morning schedule.
It all comes down to basic neuroscience and the body's desperate need for energy conservation.
Energy conservation, like a battery.
Sort of, yeah. These habits, these automated loops, are encoded in a very specific, evolutionarily primitive part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
A basal ganglia.
Yeah. Now, the best way to think of the basal ganglia is as a ruthless energy-saving device. It operates entirely outside of your conscious, rational decision-making center.
Which is a prefrontal cortex, right?
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex located right behind your forehead.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex is amazing. It does math, it writes poetry, it plans for retirement. But it requires a massive amount of caloric energy to function. Making deliberate, conscious choices physically exhausts the brain.
Because the brain consumes something like 20% of the body's energy, right? Even though it's only a tiny fraction of our body weight.
Exactly. Your brain is an absolute energy hog. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it wants to save that precious energy for real life-or-death emergencies.
Like running from a bear, not making coffee.
Exactly. It doesn't want to waste calories figuring out how to tie a shoe or brew coffee every single morning. So, the moment it learns that a certain cue consistently leads to a specific routine that provides a reliable reward, it takes that entire behavioral sequence and pushes it down into the basal ganglia.
It pushes it down to run on autopilot.
Yes. It essentially locks the file.
Yeah.
This is precisely why relying on sheer willpower alone to change a bad habit almost always fails.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because willpower is exhausting.
Right. Willpower is a function of that expensive prefrontal cortex. When you try to just power through a craving or force yourself out of bed, you are actively fighting against your brain's deeply ingrained biological imperative to conserve as energy reserves.
This was one of my favorite parts of the research. I was trying to visualize this basal ganglia, and I came up with an analogy that really helped it click for me.
So let's hear it.
It's like your brain has this highly efficient factory manager working down in the basement.
Okay, I like that.
And this manager is an absolute genius at keeping the assembly line running smoothly without a single hiccup. They hit all their quotas, they never take a break, but the massive catch is the factory manager does not care at all what product is being manufactured on that line.
Right, they're just completely indifferent to the product itself.
Exactly. The manager doesn't care if the assembly line is producing life-saving medicine or if it's producing toxic radioactive sludge. Their only job, their only biological directive, is to ensure the conveyor belt never, ever stops moving.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
Thanks. So if the brain is just trying to be efficient, it is going to lock in our terrible self-destructive habits just as tightly and with just as much protective armor as our good ones.
That's spot on. The basal ganglia has absolutely no moral compass. It doesn't judge the qualitative value of the routine. It only recognizes the frictionless efficiency of the loop.
It just wants things to run smoothly.
Right. It just sees that QA leads to reward C, and it greases the wheels to make sure routine B happens as fast as possible. So if we want to change the output of that factory, if we want to stop producing toxic sludge and break a negative habit, brute force is just a terrible strategy.
Because you can't just stand at the top of the stairs and yell at the factory manager to stop the line.
Exactly. They won't listen. They literally don't speak the language of logic. Instead, the psychological research suggests a much more strategic, almost sneaky approach.
A sneaky approach. I like the sound of that.
You have to disrupt the cue, or you have to deliberately swap out the routine while keeping the cue and reward the same.
Okay, let's make that really concrete, because the theory sounds great, but how do we actually execute that strategy against the morning dread and the snooze button?
Let's look at the physical environment of that snooze habit. Currently, the cue is the sound of the alarm, but it's also the proximity.
Right, it's right there on the nightstand.
Exactly. The alarm is sitting right next to your head. Your arm knows exactly where it is. If you simply take that alarm clock or your phone and you move it all the way across the bedroom to a dresser on the opposite wall, you have radically disrupted the cue.
Because now you can't just slap it without looking.
Right. When the alarm goes off the next morning, the automatic physical sequence of the factory manager is broken. You can't just lazily reach out your arm. Suddenly, your bare feet have to touch that freezing cold floor.
The worst part.
It is. But you have to physically stand up, you have to support your own body weight, you have to walk 4 or 5 steps across the room and engage your entire nervous system.
So you're forcing yourself to wake up.
Yes. By the time your hand actually touches the clock to turn it off, you have successfully interrupted the basal ganglia's autopilot sequence. The friction of the cold floor and the walking forces your prefrontal cortex to wake up, boot online, and make a conscious choice about what to do next.
And I can tell you from personal experience, doing that feels absolutely awful at first. You are standing there shivering and you are so annoyed.
Oh, completely.
But that annoyance is actually the feeling of your brain being forced to spend energy it wanted to hoard. Which brings up something else I found really illuminating in the notes we're looking at today. We have all heard that old adage that it takes 21 days to form a new habit.
Right, the classic 21-day rule.
It's repeated everywhere. Every magazine, every self-help blog. You just have to grit your teeth for 3 weeks. But the data completely debunks this, doesn't it?
It completely dismantles it. The 21-day myth is a fascinating piece of cultural telephone.
Where did it even come from?
It actually originated decades ago from anecdotal observations made by a plastic surgeon. He noticed that it took his patients about 21 days to adjust to seeing their new faces in the mirror, or for amputees to stop feeling phantom limb sensations.
Wait, so it was just about adjusting to a physical change?
Exactly. It had absolutely nothing to do with behavioral psychology or neuroplasticity. But it sounded catchy, so it stuck. The actual clinical studies reveal a very different reality. The data shows that it takes an average of 66 days to form a new habit.
66 days. That is more than 2 months of daily effort.
And that is just an average. It depends entirely on the complexity of the action you are trying to automate. If you decide your new habit is just drinking a single glass of water immediately after you wake up, that might only take 20 days to lock into the basal ganglia.
Because it's a simple action.
Right. But if you are trying to commit to a rigorous, hour-long daily workout regimen before work, the data shows that could take much longer, sometimes up to 10 or 12 weeks of conscious effort before it starts to feel automatic.
You know, I think that is actually an incredibly compassionate piece of data.
How so?
Because if you're trying to stop hitting snooze and you're still struggling immensely on day 22, the old myth tells you that you are a failure. It tells you that you lack discipline and you should just give up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the reality is you aren't a failure at all. You're just in the messy middle of the process. Your internal factory manager is just throwing a tantrum because they are still resisting the new assembly line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Persistence is the only way through because you are literally physically forging new neural pathways in your brain tissue. It requires consistent repetition over a long period for the brain to finally throw its hands up and accept the new routine as the default.
Okay, so let's transition and keep moving through our hypothetical day. You've managed to get out of bed, you didn't hit snooze, you're in your car, driving to work. But today, the commute isn't on autopilot.
Today is a bad traffic day.
Today is a terrible traffic day. You are sitting in mind-numbing, bumper-to-bumper traffic. You are crawling at 5 miles an hour. You are running late. Your hands are gripping the steering wheel so tightly your knuckles are turning white.
We've all been there.
And you can smell the sharp, metallic tang of exhaust leaking into the cabin from the truck in front of you. You are staring at a sea of glaring red taillights, and then suddenly, a car from the adjacent lane aggressively swerves into your lane.
Cutting you off with, what, 2 inches to spare?
2 inches to spare, and they slam on their brakes. You instinctively slam on yours. The seatbelt locks across your chest, and instantly, this massive wave of totally irrational, overwhelming panic and boiling, explosive anger washes over you.
Adrenaline dump.
Yes. Your heart is pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat. You start sweating. You finally arrive at the office parking lot 20 minutes later, and you haven't even walked in the door. You haven't opened a single email yet, but you were already profoundly chemically exhausted.
This scenario is the perfect bridge because this is where we transition from the science of habit into the raw mechanics of anxiety.
Because they're connected, right?
Deeply connected. It is absolutely crucial to understand that habit and anxiety are intimately intertwined in the brain's architecture. When that car aggressively cuts you off, your amygdala, which is the small almond-shaped emotion and threat detection center of your brain, completely hijacked your nervous system.
It just takes over.
Completely. Just like the basal ganglia automates your morning routine to save energy, the amygdala automates your survival response to keep you alive. It bypasses logic completely.
Right, and there is an incredible analogy in the text that really stuck with me to explain how this works. It asks you to imagine being a young child, maybe a prehistoric child, playing in a beautiful sunny meadow.
Okay, a prehistoric child.
Yeah. Suddenly, you hear a sharp rustle in the tall grass. You turn your head, and you see a massive, terrifying lion locking eyes with you.
They'll do it.
Your brain takes a high-definition snapshot of that absolute visceral terror. It records the sound of the rustling grass, the smell of the air, the physical sensation of the panic, and it sears that data into your long-term memory with crystal clarity.
It remembers everything about that threat.
Everything. Why? So that the next time, maybe 5 years later, you hear a similar rustle in the bushes, your brain doesn't waste precious milliseconds asking the prefrontal cortex to logically evaluate the situation.
Right, you don't stop and think, I wonder if that's a rabbit.
Exactly. You don't stick around to investigate if it's just the wind. Your amygdala floods your body with adrenaline and you just run. It is a brilliant system. It keeps you alive.
It is a flawless evolutionary design. But if we connect this perfectly tuned alarm system to the incredibly complex, abstract reality of modern life, we start to see the problem.
Because there aren't any lions on the highway.
Exactly. Our limbic systems are constantly, relentlessly being stimulated. We aren't facing actual lions in the savannah anymore. But the amygdala is primitive. It literally does not know the difference between a physical, life-or-death predator and a psychological, ego-based stressor.
Wow. It really can't tell the difference.
No. The physiological response it triggers is exactly the same. So when your limbic system gets overwhelmed by the constant, low-grade simmering stress of modern living, it becomes chronically hypervigilant.
It's just stuck in the on position.
It's always scanning the horizon for the lion. And because it can't find one, it starts dressing everyday nuisances, a frustrating traffic jam, a curtly worded email from your boss, a slightly unexpected credit card bill in a lion costume.
A lion costume. I just love that image so much.
It treats a rude driver like a literal threat to your physical existence.
A traffic jam in a lion costume. An unread email wearing a fake mane. It perfectly captures how ridiculous and disproportionate our physical reactions are compared to the actual literal threat.
But in the moment, it doesn't feel ridiculous.
Not at all. In the moment, it feels so undeniably real in the body. You are vibrating with adrenaline. And this brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful and transformative concepts we found in the research today.
The psychological framework of the wounded child.
Yes, the wounded child. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. The wounded child is a really evocative, helpful framework used by psychologists to describe that internal voice of learned chronic anxiety. It is the part of our psyche that was born from past traumas, from childhood insecurities, from old rejections or abandonments that we haven't fully processed.
So it's like we're carrying that past version of ourselves around.
Exactly. Because of those past experiences, this internal voice is deeply, fundamentally paranoid. It constantly predicts doom, it assumes everyone in the room is judging it, and it feels a desperate, exhausting need to be hypervigilant at all times just to avoid being hurt or caught off guard again.
It speaks so loudly, it really dictates our behavior in ways we don't even realize. There is a specific phrase from the documents that completely stopped me in my tracks.
Which one?
The line is, always under anger is fear.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
It is. When I first read that, I honestly pushed back on it in my head. I thought, no way, sometimes I am just mad. When that guy cut me off in traffic, I wasn't scared of him. I was furious that he was being a jerk.
Right, that's the immediate surface level reaction.
But when I really sat with it and stripped the scenario down, it is so profoundly true. Think about the traffic jam example. When you are sitting alone in your car, screaming at the windshield, flipping off a stranger because they cut you off, you feel like you are full of righteous rage.
You feel powerful.
Yes, you feel powerful, but you are actually mad at the driver's personality. Beneath that anger, you are terrified. You are terrified of losing control of your vehicle. You are terrified of your car being wrecked and the financial ruin that might cause. You are fundamentally terrified of your physical safety and your life being violated.
It's a completely defensive posture.
Totally defensive.
Or consider another highly relatable scenario. Snapping at a colleague at the office or snapping at your partner at home over a misplaced item like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If you blow up because someone left their shoes in the middle of the hallway, you aren't actually experiencing pure rage about the spatial location of the footwear.
Right, that would be illogical.
Exactly. The wounded child inside of you is terrified. It is terrified of being undervalued, of your time being ignored, of your needs not being respected, or ultimately of being abandoned.
Wow. Abandon over a pair of shoes.
Anger is almost never the primary emotion. Anger is merely the bodyguard for that underlying fear. It is the porcupine reflexively raising its sharp quills, specifically because its soft underbelly feels exposed and vulnerable.
That reframing changes everything, because if you realize you are dealing with a terrified, wounded child who has somehow locked themselves in the driver's seat of your brain, you can't just yell at them to drive better.
Right, yelling doesn't work.
You have to gently take the wheel. So who's supposed to be driving? If the wounded child is panicking, what is the alternative?
The alternative introduced in the documents is the psychological antidote to the wounded child, which they refer to as the capable adult self.
The capable adult self.
Yes. If the wounded child is your reactive amygdala, the capable adult self is your rational, grounded, higher-level prefrontal cortex. It is the part of you that can observe a situation objectively without confusing a logistical problem with an emotional threat.
I want to share this specific example from the text because I think it illustrates the dynamic between these two voices perfectly. It's the scenario about the window in the floor.
Oh, I love that example. It's a brilliant, slightly absurd scenario that makes the point wonderfully.
Yeah. The author asks you to imagine that you have this bold, avant-garde architectural idea. You decide to install a thick, clear glass window right in the middle of your living room floor.
Just so you can see the earth and the foundation beneath your house.
Right. It's quirky, but you love it. You hire contractors, you install it, and it looks great. But a few weeks later, in the middle of the night, you are walking across the dark living room, you step on the glass, and it shatters.
Oh, no.
You fall through slightly and cut your foot. It's a mess. Now, pay close attention to the two very different internal voices that can respond to this event.
Okay.
The wounded child voice immediately rushes in and screams, "You are such a profound idiot. Who on earth puts a window in the floor? What a massive, embarrassing failure. You always ruin everything you touch. Everyone is going to laugh at you."
It is so incredibly harsh. The wounded child never just addresses the broken glass. It immediately escalates to character assassination and total catastrophe.
Yes, it attacks you personally.
It makes it about your fundamental worth as a human being. It globalizes the failure.
Exactly.
Okay.
But if you can pause that reaction, the capable adult self steps in with a completely different tone.
How does the capable adult handle it?
The capable adult looks at the shattered glass and says, well, okay, the glass clearly didn't hold up to the weight. That's a structural failure. But I still really love the design concept. I'm not stupid for trying it.
It separates the action from the identity.
Exactly. It says, let's find a practical solution. We can clean up this hazard right now. We can bandage the foot. And tomorrow, let's call the contractor and use 3-inch thick reinforced plexiglass instead.
The capable adult self doesn't spiral into shame. It just coolly assesses the empirical data, accepts the reality of the situation without judgment, and pivots to a solution.
It is such a lighter way to live. But the million-dollar question is, how do we actually cultivate that capable adult voice? Because when that glass shatters or when that car cuts me off, the wounded child is screaming so loudly through a megaphone, I can't even hear the capable adult.
Cultivating that voice essentially requires becoming your own parent. It is an active, conscious practice of self-regulation.
Becoming your own parent, that sounds like a lot of work.
It is work. When an inciting incident happens and you feel that hot flush of adrenaline and you hear that critical, catastrophic inner voice start to rise up and tell you that you are a failure, you have to consciously intervene.
You'll have to step
You
in.
have to build a wedge of awareness between the stimulus and the response. You have to take a physical breath, pause, and explicitly ask yourself, wait, what would a deeply loving, highly competent mentor say to me right now in this exact moment?
And I imagine you have to do that a lot.
It takes a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
You have to do it over and over again to overwrite the old programming, physically forging new neural pathways until the capable adult self eventually becomes your default automatic responder instead of the terrified wounded child.
Okay, let's take this capable adult and walk them right into the next part of our hypothetical stressful day. The office.
Ah, the office, the ultimate testing ground.
You survive the commute, you sit down at your desk, the harsh fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead, giving you a slight headache. You look at your email inbox and it is completely overflowing.
Just looking at it makes you stressed.
Right. You have a massive, complex, high-stakes project due by the end of the week, and you haven't even started the research phase. You feel this suffocating, physical wave of overwhelm wash over you. Your chest gets tight.
So what do?
You don't start the project. You engage in classic textbook avoidance behavior. You suddenly decide that right now is the absolutely critical time to reorganize your desk drawers.
Oh, of course. Suddenly the pens need to be color-coded.
Exactly. You start color-coding your pens, you check social media for 20 minutes, and all the while you were doing this, your inner critic, your wounded child, is just verbally beating you up, calling you lazy, undisciplined, and an unproductive fraud who is going to get fired.
It's a brutal cycle.
And later that afternoon, to make matters worse, a colleague walks past your desk. You smile and say hello, and they just give you a very short, curt nod, don't make eye contact, and keep walking.
Oh, that stings.
Immediately, your stomach drops. You take it deeply, profoundly, personally. You start spinning a narrative. They hate me. I must have said something incredibly stupid in yesterday's staff meeting. They're probably talking about me to the boss.
This office narrative perfectly encapsulates how insidious the inner critic can be and how it operates under a false flag.
A false flag? What do you mean?
The inner critic actually genuinely believes it is helping you. It uses this harsh, negative self-talk as a misguided motivational tool. It was born from the wounded child's deep fear of failure and rejection.
So it's trying to protect us by bullying us.
Exactly. It thinks, if I don't whip myself into shape, I will fail, and if I fail, I will be abandoned. But as the texts point out, with a very grounded, undeniably logical real-life example, imagine you were sitting at a kitchen table with a 7-year-old child who was crying and struggling to solve a difficult math problem.
Okay, a child struggling with math.
You would never lean over that table and call them stupid. You would never tell them they are a lazy failure and that they're going to amount to nothing.
No, never. That would be awful.
You know intuitively, as an adult, that this abusive tactic would only crush their spirit, flood them with anxiety, and make them give up entirely.
And yet, we do exactly that to ourselves inside our own heads all day long. We speak to ourselves with a level of cruelty and vitriol that we would never, ever inflict on a friend, let alone a vulnerable child.
We do. We are our own worst abusers. And this internal insecurity directly feeds into that social trigger you mentioned next, the reflex of taking things personally when the colleague walked by.
Right, assuming they're mad at you.
The documents present a really illuminating scenario to expose the illusion of personal reactions. Imagine you gather your closest social circle and you announce some big news. You are moving to a brand new city across the country to take a new job.
Okay, big news.
Now watch the reactions. One friend might react with immediate defensive anger and start distancing themselves from you. Another friend might burst into tears and become incredibly clingy. A third friend might be ecstatically, genuinely happy for you and want to help you pack.
And if the wounded child is analyzing this room, it looks at the angry friend and immediately internalizes it. It thinks, I am a bad person for leaving. I have betrayed them. I am selfish.
Exactly. The wounded child makes it all about their own perceived flaws. But the objective reality is, those three radically different reactions have almost nothing to do with you or the objective fact that you are moving.
Really? Nothing to do with me.
Very little. The angry friend might be reacting defensively from their own deep-seated, unresolved childhood fear of abandonment. The crying friend might be mourning the loss of their own daily support system because they rely heavily on you for emotional regulation. The ecstatic friend might be projecting their own unfulfilled desire for adventure and change onto your life.
Wow, so they're all just reacting to their own stuff.
Every single person in that room is reacting to their own internal issues, their own fears, their own wounded children. It is rarely, if ever, actually about you.
I have to admit, when I first read this section of the notes, I really wanted to push back on it. I love the philosophical idea that nothing is personal. It sounds very zen. But practically speaking, in the real world, if I walk around believing that absolutely no one's bad behavior is about me, don't I just become a total doormat?
That's a very common concern.
Right. How can I possibly set healthy boundaries with people if I am constantly rationalizing and excusing their poor behavior by saying, oh, they're just dealing with their own wounded child? Doesn't that just invite people to treat me poorly?
That is a phenomenal pushback, and it raises a really vital point. The distinction we have to make here lies entirely in how the capable adult self handles a boundary violation versus how the wounded child handles it. Not taking things personally does not mean accepting abuse.
Okay, so what's the difference in how they handle it?
Let's look at the restaurant steak example provided in the source material because it clarifies this distinction beautifully. Imagine you were out to a nice dinner, you are paying good money, and you explicitly order your steak medium well. But the waiter brings the plate, you cut into it, and it arrives completely rare. It is cold and bloody in the center.
Oh, man. This is a classic, universally dreaded high anxiety scenario for so many people. The terrifying interaction of sending food back to the waiter.
Right. It induces so much social anxiety. So let's look at how the wounded child reacts to this bloody steak. It usually swings to one of two extremes. In the first extreme, the wounded child shrinks. It suffers in complete silence.
Just eats the steak anyway.
You eat the bloody cold steak even though you hate it because you are utterly terrified of being perceived as a burden, of causing a scene, or of the waiter being mad at you. You internalize the error as your cross to bear.
And the other extreme.
In the second extreme, the wounded child's ego gets deeply offended. It takes the undercooked meat as a deliberate personal insult. You think, they don't respect me, they're trying to pull one over on me. So you blow up, you get aggressive, you act incredibly rude to the waiter, you leave a terrible tip, and you ruin the dinner for everyone at the table.
Because in both of those extreme cases, the wounded child is entirely confusing a simple logistical error in the kitchen with a profound emotional threat to their social standing or safety.
Exactly. The wounded child cannot separate the event from their ego. But the capable adult self operates completely differently. The capable adult self knows, fundamentally, that emotions and logic are separate entities.
So what does the capable adult do with the steak?
The capable adult self looks down at the bloody steak and thinks, okay, this meat isn't cooked the way I asked. That is merely a logistical error in a busy kitchen. It has absolutely nothing to do with my inherent worth as a human being, and the chef isn't secretly insulting me.
Because it's just a piece of meat.
Exactly. So because there is no emotional threat, there is no need for anxiety or aggression. The capable adult simply catches the waiter's eye and kindly, but very firmly, says, excuse me, I ordered this medium well and it is quite rare. Could you please take it back and have it cooked a bit longer? Thank you.
That sounds so simple.
No heart palpitations, no suffering in silence, no dramatic explosions. Just a clear, direct, polite expression of a boundary and a need. Setting healthy boundaries absolutely does not require aggression. It only requires uncoupling your self-worth from the transaction.
That reframing is incredibly liberating. It really is. It feels like finally taking off a heavy backpack that you didn't even realize you were carrying all day.
Yes, that heavy backpack of ego and fear.
And speaking of carrying heavy backpacks, the texts explore this broader concept of absorbing world pain, which I think is so relevant right now. Think about our overwhelmed office worker. They take a 10-minute break from their daunting project, they pull out their phone to zone out, and they immediately read a horrific, deeply upsetting news headline about a tragedy happening halfway across the world.
And instantly, their whole physiological state changes.
Suddenly, they feel an actual physical sickness in the pit of their stomach. Their chest gets tight, their breathing gets shallow, and they carry that profound sorrow and anxiety with them, like a dark cloud, for the rest of the entire workday.
This is a phenomenon of empathy running totally amok, and it is physically, biologically damaging to the organism.
Empathy running amok. I've never heard it phrased like that.
When we vividly internalize the severe suffering of the world through our screens, our bodies react as if the physical threat is immediate and present in the room with us. We flood our own nervous systems with cortisol and adrenaline. The documents offer a really profound, challenging piece of wisdom here. You do not need to physically feel everyone else's pain to be a good, moral person.
I want to pause and just repeat that because I think someone listening to this right now desperately needs to hear it today. You do not need to feel everyone's pain to be a good person.
We so often confuse the act of carrying someone else's pain with the act of actually helping them. But carrying that psychic pain, sitting at your desk feeling sick over a news article, only creates a biological stress response in you.
It doesn't actually fix anything.
It does not help the victims of the tragedy, it only exhausts you. And an exhausted, anxious, cortisol-drenched person is fundamentally, biologically less equipped to actually do any tangible good in their own community.
Because you're just tapped out.
You have to learn to critically evaluate the degrees of separation between you and the tragedy. If the event is not directly in your sphere of influence, if you cannot physically go help, or vote on it, or donate meaningfully, you have to consciously or deliberately give your wounded child permission to release it.
You have to set the backpack down.
You have to set that backpack down so that you can conserve your energy to tackle the localized problems you actually can solve.
Okay, so let's fast forward our narrative to the very end of our hypothetical day. It is evening. You have finally come home. You are completely and utterly frazzled. You have been dodging imaginary lines in traffic. You have been battling your inner critic at the office. You've navigated social anxieties, and you've absorbed the stress of the 24-hour news cycle.
You are exhausted to your marrow.
You just want to relax. You wash your face. You put on your pajamas. You collapse into bed. The room is dark. The ceiling fan is humming a steady rhythm, but your brain absolutely stubbornly will not shut off.
That's like a runaway train.
Yes. You are lying there staring at the shifting shadows on the ceiling, replaying every single awkward conversation you had that day, worrying about the project due on Friday, and already dreading the sound of that alarm clock that is going to start this whole exhausting cycle all over again in just a few short hours.
This exact scenario is the unavoidable biological consequence of a day that has been entirely ruled by the wounded child and the hyperactive amygdala.
So it's just a continuation of the same biological loop.
What happens is we lie in the dark and we try to use pure logic to calm our nervous systems down. We lie in bed and we aggressively tell ourselves, go to sleep, stop worrying about the presentation, there's nothing you can do about it now. You need to rest so you aren't a zombie tomorrow.
I have had that exact conversation with myself so many times.
But, as the research clearly explains, you simply cannot think your way out of a physiological anxiety response.
But why not? I mean, my brain is the thing generating the anxiety. Why can't my brain just reason with it? Why does logic completely fail us at 2 a.m.?
Because of the physical architecture of the brain. When the emotion center, the amygdala, is highly activated and pumping out stress hormones, the neural doorway to the logical, rational, prefrontal cortex literally slams shut.
It just closes.
Blood flow is diverted away from the logic center and toward the survival centers and the extremities. You are essentially locked out of the rational part of your own brain.
Wow, locked out of your own brain.
To make matters worse, the harder you actively try to force yourself to sleep, the more frustrated you become. That mounting frustration signals to your brain that there's a severe problem, which causes the adrenal glands to produce even more cortisol.
And cortisol is bad for sleep, right?
Cortisol is the biological archenemy of melatonin, which is the hormone you desperately need to initiate sleep. Your brain gets stuck producing these rapid, jagged, highly active beta waves, and it physically cannot downshift its frequency into the slower, smoother alpha or theta waves that are required for true relaxation and sleep.
Okay, but this is exactly why telling an anxious person lying in bed to just relax is the most infuriating advice in the world.
It's the absolute worst.
It's like looking at a drowning person and calmly telling them to just breathe water. It's insulting because it feels physically impossible. So if we are locked out of our logic center and we can't forcefully willpower our way into sleep, how do we actually mechanically initiate that shift in our brainwaves?
If the front door to logic is deadbolted, we have to sneak in through the back door.
The back door. Okay, I'm listening.
And the back door to the human nervous system is the physical body. The documents emphasize this incredibly effective concept of coming to your senses. Think about the nature of anxiety. Anxiety, by its very definition, lives entirely in the imaginary future, worrying about what might happen, or in the ruminating past, obsessing over what already happened.
Right, it's never about right now.
It cannot exist in the present. But your physical senses, your sight, your sound, your smell, your touch, your taste, they are biologically bound to the absolute present moment. They can only process what is happening right here, right now.
So the strategy is to use your physical senses as an anchor, to literally drag your brain's awareness back from the imaginary future and tether it to the safety of the present moment.
Exactly. And the texts outline a very specific biological mechanism tied to this, rooted in the concept of biophilia, which explores our innate evolutionary human connection to nature and sensory input. Let's detail how you actually do this exercise when you are panicking in bed.
Walk me through it.
First, you have to focus on a physical object you can touch. Let's say it's your blanket. Don't just hold it. Actively explore it. Feel the specific texture. Is it soft fleece? Is it a ribbed quilt? Is it cool or warm? Force your brain to process the tactile sensation.
Okay, so that's touch.
Second, introduce a smell. The text specifically mentioned the power of essential oils like lavender. Clinical studies have shown that inhaling the scent of lavender can actually bypass the logic center and directly trigger the production of calming alpha waves in the brain.
Oh, wow. Direct to the alpha waves.
Third, listen to something specifically soothing. And this is important. Do not listen to a narrative podcast or an audiobook that makes your prefrontal cortex try to follow a plot or learn something new.
So no true crime at 2 a.m.
Exactly. You need ambient noise? Listen to a sound bath, the rhythmic sound of heavy rain, or a gentle, slow, monotone voice that doesn't demand cognitive engagement.
And the real secret sauce here is engaging multiple senses all at the exact same time, right? Doing just one isn't always enough to derail the train.
Yes. The general rule of thumb derived from the research is to try and engage at least 3 senses simultaneously. If you are deeply focusing on the physical texture of the blanket in your hands, while simultaneously smelling the lavender oil on your wrist, while also actively listening to the sound of rain falling, your brain, literally mathematically, does not have the cognitive bandwidth left to maintain the complex, anxious narrative loop of the wounded child.
Because it's too busy processing all that sensory input.
The brain functions like a computer processor. It can only process so much data at once. By deliberately flooding the processor with safe, grounding, present-moment sensory data, you force the amygdala to stand down. It realizes there is no lion in the room.
The lion is gone.
The cortisol levels finally drop, the melatonin is allowed to rise, and the brain waves can gracefully shift from the jagged beta state into the restorative alpha state.
That is just a brilliant mechanical hack for the nervous system. You aren't arguing with the anxiety at all. You aren't trying to debate the wounded child. You're just quietly walking over and unplugging its power source by overwhelming the bandwidth.
That's exactly it, unplugging the power source.
Okay, so the bandwidth is overwhelmed. You finally fall asleep. The night passes. The sun comes up. And the alarm goes off again. But this time, our hypothetical listener isn't a passive victim waking up to a dark room full of dread.
Right, they have a whole new approach.
They are waking up with a brand new toolkit. We now understand how to soothe the wounded child. We know how to use our senses to hack our nervous system. But how do we go on the offensive? How do we actively program a new autopilot? How do we build a day from scratch that actually serves us, instead of just desperately surviving the day we stumble into?
This is where we return to the science of habits that we discussed at the very beginning, but this time we're approaching it from the perspective of the architect rather than the victim.
The architect of our own habits.
The documents outline several highly effective strategies for creating positive habits that actually stick in the basal ganglia. First, you need absolute clarity. Vague intentions fail. They advocate for using SMART goals, an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
So no more vague resolutions.
Right. So instead of waking up and making a vague, doomed goal like, I want to be less stressed today, a SMART goal is highly defined, it looks like. I will do exactly 5 minutes of deep box breathing in my home office chair at 8 a.m. every single weekday.
But even with a perfectly defined, highly specific goal, we know that the factory manager down in our basal ganglia is incredibly lazy and hates spending energy on new things. So how do we make the initiation of that new routine feel completely effortless?
By using a really clever behavioral technique called habit stacking. If you remember the habit loop, the cue, the routine, and the reward, you know that establishing a brand new cue out of thin air takes a lot of energy.
Because you have to remember to do it.
Right. So instead of trying to invent a new trigger, you take your new desired habit and you anchor it directly to an old, deeply established habit that you already do without thinking.
Give me a real-life example of how we could implement habit stacking in the morning routine we've been talking about.
Let's say your deeply established rock-solid morning habit is brushing your teeth. You do it every single morning, automatically. You don't need a calendar reminder. Your brain just does it.
Okay, toothbrushing is the anchor.
Now, let's say you want to start a daily practice of gratitude journaling because you know it will help soothe your wounded child. You don't just tell yourself, I'll try to journal sometime before noon. You stack it.
You attach it directly to the brushing.
You create a new unbreakable rule. Immediately after I put my toothbrush back into the holder, which is the established automated cue, I will walk to my desk, sit down, and write exactly one sentence in my gratitude journal, which is the new routine. You are essentially hitching your new habit to the back of the freight train of your old habit. You leverage the existing momentum to carry you effortlessly into the new behavior.
I really love that approach. It completely removes the exhaustion of decision-making. You don't have to decide when to journal. It just becomes the inevitable next link in the morning chain.
It just flows naturally.
And there is another concept detailed in the text that I absolutely adore, which is called temptation bundling. This is a brilliant strategy because it honestly acknowledges human nature. It acknowledges that we are fundamentally motivated by immediate pleasure and gratification.
We certainly are.
The core idea is to pair a necessary behavior, something you need to do, but that requires effort and friction, with a behavior that you absolutely love to do.
It is an incredibly effective way to artificially manufacture a powerful reward at the end of the habit loop. For example, let's say you know you need to start cooking healthy meals at home instead of constantly ordering expensive, heavy takeout when you're tired.
Which is so tempting.
But the reality is, cooking feels like a massive chore after a long, stressful day at the office. Your basal ganglia strongly prefers the easy routine of opening a delivery app. So you bundle the chore with the temptation. You make a strict, non-negotiable rule for yourself.
What's the rule?
You are only allowed to listen to your absolute favorite, most entertaining comedy or true crime show while you're physically standing at the stove, chopping vegetables and cooking. You cannot listen to it in the car. You cannot listen to it at the gym.
Yeah.
Only while cooking.
Right. So suddenly, the prospect of cooking isn't a draining chore anymore. Cooking actually transforms into the exclusive VIP gateway to the exact thing you enjoy most. You suddenly find yourself looking forward to chopping onions because you get to hear the next part of the story.
Exactly. You change the association.
I actually tried this once with something else, and it failed spectacularly, which I think is a good caveat. I tried to do temptation bundling by telling myself I would only let myself watch my favorite streaming show while I was running on the treadmill.
Oh, let me guess.
Yeah, the friction of running was so high and the reward wasn't quite strong enough to overcome it that I ended up just stopping going to the gym entirely and I stopped watching the show. It was a total failure.
That's a great point. The reward really has to outweigh the friction for the bundle to work.
But what happens when the entire system inevitably breaks down? Because life is messy and unpredictable. What happens when you oversleep or your kids get sick or you are just genuinely too physically exhausted to do the habit stack or the temptation bundle? Does the whole new assembly line crash and burn?
That is the exact point of failure for most people. And it's why total, uncompromising rigidity almost always leads to eventual failure. The paranoid wounded child demands absolute perfection and catastrophizes any minor slip-up.
Right, it says, well, you missed a day, so it's all ruined.
If you miss one day of journaling, the wounded child says, see, you failed. You have no discipline. Might as well quit. But the capable adult self is pragmatic. It intentionally builds flexibility and forgiveness into the system. The documents discuss the vital structural importance of maintaining emergency reserves or adopting what they call a vacation mindset within your daily routines.
Explain the concept of emergency reserves in detail, because I think a lot of type A high achievers listening to this really need to internalize this idea.
When you set a goal, let's say your goal is to work out 5 days a week. Instead of demanding a perfect streak, you deliberately give yourself a set number of get-out-of-jail-free cards each month.
Get out of jail free cards. I like that.
Let's say you get 3 cards. These are your official, sanctioned emergency reserves. If you have a truly terrible day at work, you have a headache, and you physically cannot bring yourself to go to the gym, you don't beat yourself up. You explicitly, consciously cash in one of your reserve cards.
That is part of the plan.
By making the exception a pre-planned, authorized part of the system itself, you completely bypass the feeling of failure. You didn't break your streak. You didn't fail the program. You simply utilized a built-in reserve. It keeps the habit alive psychologically, preventing that sudden plunge into despair that makes you throw your hands up and quit the whole endeavor entirely.
It's really about the deliberate integration of joy, ease, and grace into the mundane struggles of life. Which brings me back to a story from the notes that I just can't stop thinking about. It's the story of the lawyer with the sandbox under his desk.
Oh, there's a fantastic example.
To me, that is the ultimate execution of the vacation mindset in action. According to the case study, this guy was a highly successful lawyer, but he was drowning in stress. He couldn't just quit his intense corporate job and move to a beach in Mexico. His wounded child was probably screaming that he was trapped.
Feeling completely stuck.
But his capable adult self looked at the situation and got incredibly creative. He went to a hardware store, bought a shallow plastic tray, filled it with soft, clean play sand, and placed it discreetly right under his office desk.
A literal sandbox in a law firm.
Yes. While he was sitting there drafting these intense, high-stakes legal briefs, he would take his shoes and socks off and just bury his bare toes in the sand. He actively recreated his life by engineering a tiny, subversive piece of joy and physical, sensory grounding right into the middle of a highly stressful environment.
That sandbox is the perfect physical manifestation of the capable adult self at work. It recognizes a legitimate biological need, the nervous system's desperate need for calm, tactile grounding, and biophilia. And it finds a highly creative, functional, and immediate way to meet that need without blowing up the person's entire life or career.
It's such a simple but profound act of self-care.
It proves that we have the power to curate our immediate environments. We don't have to wait for a 2-week vacation once a year to feel a moment of peace. We can engineer tiny, micro moments of peace and sensory relief directly into our daily architecture.
Which brings us, I think, to a beautiful, broader reflection on everything we have unpacked today. We started this whole journey in the pitch dark.
No, we really do.
We were waking up burdened by inherited dread, reacting to learned fears. We were operating on a rigid biological autopilot that we didn't consciously program. We were reacting to minor traffic jams as if they were apex predators trying to eat us. And we were letting a terrified inner critic dictate our self-worth.
It sounds so exhausting when you lay it out like that.
It is exhausting. But the overwhelming, echoing message of all these documents is one of profound, undeniable human potential. Our brains are incredibly neuroplastic. We are not hardwired permanently.
We can always change.
We possess the extraordinary, unique capability to step back, observe the frantic workings of our own minds, soothe the terrified, wounded child, and consciously, deliberately program a new, intentional reality.
If we zoom out and connect all of this to the bigger picture of a human life, it fundamentally changes how we view our past traumas and our daily struggles.
How so?
The texts offer a really beautiful, earthy metaphor to end on. Manure is the absolute best fertilizer for growing sweet fruit. The traumas, the anxieties, the embarrassing overreactions, the painful setbacks we have faced, they are not permanent stains on our character.
They aren't signs that we're broken.
They are not signs that we are irreparably broken. They are, in fact, the exact necessary materials we must use to cultivate our future growth. They are the detailed blueprints that teach us exactly where our boundaries need to be drawn. They show us exactly what our wounded child needs to feel safe, and they guide us in how to build a resilient life that actually sustains us.
The struggles are the fertilizer. I really, truly love that perspective. So as we wrap up this session today, I want to leave you with a lingering question, a thought for you to just gently mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Or maybe tonight when you were lying in bed, listening to the rain and feeling the texture of your blanket.
That's a great time for reflection.
We've spent the last hour talking about putting down the heavy backpack of other people's pain and silencing that cruel inner critic. I want you to just imagine that feeling for a moment. If you finally put down all those fears that were never truly yours to carry in the first place, and if you completely successfully rewired your brain's autopilot to actively seek out joy and connection instead of constantly, exhaustingly scanning the horizon for danger, what kind of incredible, vibrant life would your capable adult self start building for you when that alarm clock blares tomorrow morning?